They didn't ask me if I was ready. They didn't warn me the night before, didn't sit me down over coffee, didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye when they did it. My daughter just walked in on a Tuesday morning, set a suitcase by the front door, and said, "Mom, we think this is best." I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I stood in my own kitchen, in the house I had lived in for 31 years, and I looked at that suitcase and I thought, so this is how it ends. My name is Dorothy. I am 73 years old. I taught 4th grade for 26 years. I raised 2 children, mostly on my own, after my husband Richard passed from a heart attack when our kids were still in middle school. I kept this house. I paid this mortgage. I planted every rose bush in that front yard with my own 2 hands. And on a Tuesday morning in October, my daughter packed a bag for me like I was a child going to summer camp, and she told me I was going to stay with her just for a little while. I should have known then. I should have seen it for what it was. My daughter's name is Cynthia. She's 46, lives about 2 hours north of me, has a husband named Greg who works in finance and has never once looked at me like I was a real person. They have a big house, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, and they have always wanted the money they believed was coming to them. My son Patrick lives out in Arizona. He calls on birthdays, sometimes on Christmas. He sent flowers when Richard died, which I appreciated, even if the card was signed by his assistant. Patrick was never cruel. He was just absent. And in some ways, absent is easier to forgive than what Cynthia did. What Cynthia did was deliberate. It started about 4 months before that Tuesday morning. Small things. First, she started calling more often, which I thought was sweet. She asked about my health, my medications, whether I was sleeping okay, whether the neighbors were keeping an eye on me. I told her I was fine. I am fine. I walk 2 miles every morning. I do the crossword. I volunteer at the library on Thursdays. But Cynthia had already made up her mind about what I was. She came to visit in August and walked through my house like she was doing an inspection. She opened cabinets. She checked the expiration dates on things in my refrigerator. She found a bill I'd forgotten to mail. Just one bill sitting on the counter, and she held it up like it was evidence of something terrible. "Mom," she said, in that voice she uses, the one that sounds like patience but isn't, "I'm worried about you." I told her not to be. She came back 2 weeks later with Greg. They sat at my kitchen table and told me they'd been talking. They said they thought it would be good for me to come stay with them for the winter. They said the drive was getting too long, that they worried about me being alone if something happened. Greg said something about quality of life and peace of mind for the family, and I remember thinking he sounded like a brochure. I said I would think about it. Then, 3 weeks after that, Cynthia called and asked me to sign some paperwork. She said it was just a precaution. She said her friend's mother had something similar and it made everything so much easier. She said it was a financial power of attorney, just in case I was ever unable to manage things myself. I should have called a lawyer. I should have called Patrick, useless as he was. I should have done anything other than what I did, which was drive to a notary office with my daughter and sign my name on a document I did not read carefully enough. I was 73 years old and I trusted my child. That was my mistake. The Tuesday morning came 6 weeks later. Cynthia said she'd arranged for a neighbor to check on the house. She said I could come back whenever I wanted. She helped me carry the suitcase to her car, and she was cheerful the entire drive north, talking about the guest room she'd fixed up, the trail near their neighborhood where we could walk together, the good Thai restaurant Greg liked. I sat in the passenger seat and watched my town disappear in the side mirror, and I did not say a single word. Their house was nice. I will give it that. The guest room had a good mattress, and the window looked out over the backyard. But from the very first night, something felt wrong in a way I couldn't name yet. Cynthia took my car keys on day 3. She said my car would be fine at home. She didn't want it sitting in their driveway. And anyway, where did I need to go? She said it so casually, like it was nothing, like it was a favor. I said I might want to go out. She said she'd take me wherever I needed. I said I preferred to drive myself. She said, "Mom, let's not make this harder than it needs to be," and walked out of the room. I sat on the edge of that good mattress, and I understood for the first time exactly what was happening. I was not a guest. I was not there because my daughter was worried about me. I was there because she had my power of attorney and she intended to use it. And it was much easier to use it if I was 2 hours away from everything I knew, with no car, no easy way home, and no one checking on me. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know some people will say I must have been confused, or that surely my daughter meant well, or that I'm being too harsh. I want to be very clear. I am not confused. I was not confused then. I am a woman who spent 26 years managing 30 10-year-olds at a time. I know when someone is managing me. The first week, I tested it. I asked Cynthia to take me to the bank. She said she would, and then found reasons not to. Greg had something. The traffic was bad, maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. I asked to use the computer to check my accounts online. She said the Wi-Fi was acting up. It wasn't. I could see the signal on my phone. My phone. That was the one thing she hadn't taken. I think she underestimated me. I started paying attention. I watched Greg's face when Cynthia didn't think I was looking. I watched how he glanced at her when I asked certain questions. I listened through the wall at night, not to eavesdrop, just because their voices carried and they didn't seem to think I could hear. One night, about 2.5 weeks in, I heard Greg say, "Just give it a little more time. Once it's transferred, she can go wherever she wants." And Cynthia said, I know. I just need her to stay calm. Once it's transferred, I lay in that dark room and I ran to everything I owned, the house, the small investment account Richard and I had built over 30 years, the life insurance. Not a fortune by any measure, but enough. Enough for someone like Greg to think it was worth the trouble. I did not sleep that night. The next morning, I came down to breakfast, and I smiled, and I ate my eggs, and I asked Cynthia how she was sleeping, and she said, "Fine." And I said, Good. And I thought about Richard and what he would have done, and I decided to do what Richard always did when someone underestimated him. I got quiet, and I got smart. My phone was old and the battery didn't hold a charge well, so Cynthia hadn't worried about it much. She figured it was nearly useless. What she didn't know was that I charged it every night in my room and kept the volume off and had been, very slowly, calling people. The first person I called was my friend Joan, who I'd known since our children were in school together. I didn't tell her everything. I just asked her to check on my house. She said, of course. And then she said, "Dorothy, you sound strange." And I said, "I'm fine, just tired." And I ended the call before I cried. The second person I called was a woman named Beverly who worked at the bank branch in my town. Not a close friend, but someone I'd known for years. I asked her carefully whether any changes had been made to my accounts recently. She said she couldn't discuss that over the phone. The way she said it told me something had been attempted or started. I thanked her and sat for a long time looking out the window at the backyard. Then I called directory assistance and asked for the number of a legal aid office. This is the part people don't expect. They assume that if you're old and isolated and your daughter has your power of attorney, you're finished. They assume you have no moves left. What they forget is that I was a teacher for 26 years, and teachers know how to work within systems, and I had done a great deal of reading in those 3 weeks with nothing else to do. A power of attorney does not mean your child owns you. It does not override your legal rights. It can be revoked. And financial abuse of an elderly person is a crime in every state in this country. I knew that. I had looked it up on my phone at 2 a.m. with the brightness turned all the way down. I spoke to a legal aid attorney named Mr. Okafor. I told him my situation. I told him what I'd heard through the wall. I told him about the bank. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Mrs. Dorothy, do you have access to any documents? Any mail? Anything with account numbers?" I told him I had my own phone and my social security card and my Medicare card, which I kept in my purse out of habit, and that Cynthia had not thought to take my purse, only my keys. He said that was enough to start. Over the next 4 days, we worked. Mr. Dio, Okafor was patient. He told me what he needed and I found ways to get it. I asked Cynthia to take me to the pharmacy. She could hardly say no, and while she looked at something in another aisle, I stepped outside and called Mr. Okafor for 11 minutes. He had already contacted the bank on my behalf. He had already filed paperwork to flag the accounts, and he had found through the county records office that Greg had made inquiries about listing my house. Not listed it yet, just inquiries. But that was enough. I stood outside that pharmacy in the October cold, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope exactly. Something harder than hope. Something more like resolve. Cynthia didn't notice anything. That was her real mistake in the end. She thought because I was quiet, I was defeated. She thought the woman who had packed my bag and driven me away was the same woman sitting at her breakfast table eating eggs. She had no idea who I actually was. On the 28th day, a Thursday, Mr. Okafor called and said everything was ready. I came downstairs that morning, and Cynthia was in the kitchen making coffee, and Greg had already left for work. She smiled at me and asked how I'd slept. I said, "Well, thank you." I sat down at the kitchen table. I folded my hands, and then I told her that I had spoken to an attorney. She set down the coffee pot very slowly. I told her I had revoked the power of attorney, effective 48 hours ago. I told her I had been in contact with my bank and that all accounts had been secured and any pending transfers had been flagged and stopped. I told her that county records showed Greg had made inquiries about my property and that Mr. Okafor had filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office for attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I told her I needed her to take me home today. Cynthia sat down. She looked at me for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "Mom, I don't know what someone told you, but you've misunderstood." I said, "Cynthia, I want to go home today." She tried for another 40 minutes. She cried. She said I was being cruel, that she had only been trying to help, that Greg had just been looking into things out of curiosity, that she loved me. She said a lot of things. I sat at that kitchen table, and I let her say them, and when she was done, I said quietly and very clearly, I would like to leave now. She drove me home in near silence. When I walked through my front door, in my house, on my street, I stood in the hallway for a moment and just breathed. Joan had kept it clean. There were fresh flowers on the counter, which made me laugh a little and cry a little, and I stood there for a good while, just feeling the specific weight of a place that belongs to you. I called Patrick that evening. I told him everything. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Dorothy." He always calls me Dorothy when he's being serious, never Mom. "I'm so sorry. I should have been paying more attention." I told him it was all right. I told him it was handled. But I also told him that I would be making some changes to my will and that he might want to be a bit less absent going forward, and he said, yes, I understand. Mr. Okafor was not a miracle worker. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no handcuffs, no moment of Hollywood justice. What there was, instead, was a letter from the state attorney general's office to Cynthia and Greg, and a civil notice regarding the improper use of a financial power of attorney. Greg lost his inquiry trail, and whatever he'd been planning went nowhere. Whether anything else comes of it legally, I honestly don't know yet. But they know I know. And they know that I fought back. And I think for now, that is enough. I updated my will with a new attorney, one I chose myself. I gave my medical power of attorney to Joan, who is practical and honest and who genuinely does not want my house. I set up a check-in system with my bank where I receive a text notification anytime a transaction over a certain amount is made. I changed my locks, and I went back to the library on Thursdays. First Thursday back. One of the other volunteers, A man named Harold, who always brings terrible coffee, said, "We missed you, Dorothy." And I said, "I was only gone a month." And he said, "Still." And I thought about how much that word could hold. Still. Still here. Still standing. Still mine. I have thought a lot about what I want people to take away from what happened to me. I don't want it to be a story about how horrible Cynthia is, even though what she did was wrong, and she knows it was wrong. I don't want it to be a story about luck, because I did not get lucky. I got organized. What I want you to take from this is something simpler. A financial power of attorney is a powerful legal document. Please read it before you sign it. Have your own attorney, not your child's notary, not someone they recommended. Review it before you sign it. Add limitations. Add expiration dates. Know what you're handing over and to whom. And if you are sitting somewhere right now feeling like I felt, isolated, without your keys, watching someone slowly tighten the circle around you, please know that you have not run out of options. A legal aid office costs nothing. A phone call costs nothing. The power of attorney can be revoked. The accounts can be protected. The house can be saved. You are not powerless. You are not finished. You are not a burden to be managed. You have a voice. I promise you, it still works. I know because I used mine, quietly at 2 a.m, with the brightness turned all the way down, and it was enough. It was more than enough. My roses are still in the front yard. I can see them from the kitchen window right now, cut down for winter, bare and a little stubborn, just waiting for spring. That's how I feel too.